And we are in the Gospel of Luke, and we are talking about the parable of the Good Samaritan. So we are at Luke chapter 10, verses 25 to 37. The parable of the Good Samaritan is found only in Luke's Gospel. It's one of several different stories that show up only in Luke. The last time we were here, we talked about the sending out of the 70, and that's another one of the stories that's only in Luke's Gospel. But here we have the parable of the Good Samaritan. So let's go ahead and we'll read that, and then we'll dive into it a little bit more. Luke chapter 10, 25 to 37. Just then a lawyer stood up to test Jesus. "Teacher," he said, "what must I do to inherit eternal life?" He said to him, "What is written in the law? What do you read there?" He answered, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself." And he said to him, "You have given the right answer. Do this, and you will live." But wanting to justify himself, he asked Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" Jesus replied, "A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho and fell into the hands of robbers who stripped him, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. Now by chance a priest was going down that road, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. So likewise a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, while traveling, came near him, and when he saw him, he was moved with pity. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, having poured oil and wine on them. Then he put him on his own animal, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 denarii, gave them to the innkeeper, and said, 'Take care of him, and when I come back I will repay you whatever more you spend.' Which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of the robbers?" He said, "The one who showed him mercy." Jesus said to him, "Go and do likewise." Just a little background on the road from Jerusalem to Jericho. Now, Jerusalem is quite high. It's like 3,000 something above sea level. And Jericho is very low. Jericho is like 1,300 feet below sea level. So there's a huge distance there, and I believe it's about a 20-mile trip. But you're dropping a long ways as you go from Jerusalem to Jericho. So when he says he's going down from Jerusalem, he means he's going down. He's moving towards Jericho. It's a path that winds like this. It may be 20 miles as the crow flies, but it's considerably further because it's a winding path. And along this path, there are various places where there's a valley there that casts shadows, and as you go through that area, pretty much no matter what, unless it's high noon, you are in shadows and dark. There's dark areas, and it was a common pathway for robbers to be set up along that road, and especially through this one particular valley where the shadows were long and hidden. And one of the interesting things is the theory is that the 23rd Psalm, "Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death," it's believed that King David was talking about this area on the road from Jerusalem to Jericho, where you pass through these long shadows and where these people are laying in wait to attack you and to rob you and probably kill you for your possessions. So it's a treacherous path. It was called the Red Road or the Bloody Way because of this. And so most people did not travel that road by themselves. And in fact, even into the 1900s, people that traveled that road were told not to travel that road after dark. Because even at that time, there were still robbers along the way that would attack you if you were going down that road. So at any rate, in this story, we have these people, and especially we're looking at this traveler who's traveling and has been beset upon by these robbers. We'll start at the beginning and kind of work our way through there from that. A lawyer stands up, and of course this is not a solicitor. This is a person that's versed in the law. It doesn't mean an attorney like we would think of lawyer today. He's versed in the law, and he says, "Teacher, what must I do to inherit eternal life?" And many times people are saying that he's confrontational to Christ because it says he's trying to test him. But I would relate to you that I'm not sure that he was trying to test him necessarily, or whether he was trying to find out where Jesus stood. Because this idea that he comes to later about who is my neighbor is a topic of great discussion in Jesus' time. This is a debate, a topic that's debated. And we'll talk about that as we get down to it later. But he's trying to discern where Jesus stands on things. So I'm not sure that he's in conflict with Jesus, because it seems that he agrees with Jesus pretty much down the line. He's not seeming to be confrontational. And which makes me wonder, is he in fact someone that Jesus has planted to ask this question, to open the door for the discussion with the larger group? He wants to make sure, well, I want to make sure I talk about this. So, Bob, can you make sure to ask me this question? Now, it may not have even been as literal as that, or the Spirit may have moved him to ask that question, to allow Jesus to address this very thing. And of course, this is a very important parable. This is one of the most widely known parables in all of the Bible, in the New Testament. And he goes on and talks about, let's see, he goes through, you shall love your neighbor, or love God with all your heart and all your soul and all your strength, and your neighbor is yourself. And Jesus compliments him. And then he comes to the part where the lawyer is wanting to justify himself. And this is where he's trying to find out where Jesus stands. Remember I said that they were debating, who is my neighbor? It was a big topic. You had Shammai and you had Hillel, and I talked about that before. And Shammai was the very conservative rabbi. And Shammai preached that only a fellow Hebrew is your neighbor. Hillel, the very liberal theologian at the time, the liberal rabbi, said that the Hebrew and the Gentile are your neighbor. But the Samaritan, no, not so much. They're not your neighbor. Everybody's your neighbor, but the Samaritan. As liberal as Hillel was with his interpretation of who was your neighbor, he couldn't open his heart to the Samaritan. And the problem there with the Samaritans, as you may or may not know, is that you had first of all, you had the separation of the northern and the southern kingdom, and the Samaritans were of the northern kingdom, and they was a separation there. But where the problem got greater was when there was the exile, and the Babylonians came in and conquered, and they took away all the people. Well, they left a bunch of the people behind in Samaria. And they brought other people from other ethnic groups in to replace the people that they took. Now remember, under Jewish law, you're supposed to marry within the faith, right? You're not supposed to marry outside of the faith. Well, the Samaritans were left with a small pool of potential mates, and they broke that covenant, perhaps to say, and they married outside the faith. So what you had up there was an intermingled ethnicities up there in the Samaria region, where they had married people from outside of Judaism. And they started to have differences as far as what books they looked at in the Old Testament. And when the exile was done, and after the temple had been destroyed, and the Jewish people came back and wanted to rebuild the temple, the Samaritans came and wanted to help. Well, the Jewish people that had came back from the exile had only married Jewish people and kept that lineage pure, and they said, no, you're a bunch of half-breeds, you cannot help us to build the temple. And so the Samaritans were a little put off, rejected, and they went to Mount Gerizim, and there they built their own temple in around 400 BC. So their temple was on that mountain, which was a mountain that Moses had indicated that you needed to do at least 3 pilgrimages to a year for the high holidays. And that's where they worshipped. Up until about the year 200 BC, when the high priest in Jerusalem sent troops out and destroyed their temple. So you can see there's a little bit of animosity and angst between these two groups. And so here in this story, we have this 2 religious people that come by, and there's lots of debate on why they may or may not have wanted to help. The main one has to do with them being near what may have been a dead body, but just blood in and of itself. Is in a bodily fluid in the wrong place is unclean in the Jewish laws, and blood is supposed to be inside, not outside. So dealing with a bloody body would have made them ritually impure. And so that's usually the idea of why both of those religious men walked on by. Plus, well, I could spend a bunch of time here trying to patch him up. I'll become ritually impure. I'll have to go through all this process of becoming pure, ritually pure. And he's so beat up, he's probably going to die anyway, so what's the bother? And also, this is in a bad place. Remember, they're walking down this road where there are thieves and robbers. Perhaps he's just a decoy to draw me over to try to help. And then someone's going to jump me. And I can remember as a child, that happened to one of our hired men. Somebody set up a car with a woman stranded with her car on one of the county roads, and he stopped to help, and 5 guys jumped out and beat him up and robbed him. So that kind of thing still happened to that day, and that's one of the things that they did along this way. So they may have felt, I don't want to get involved, it's too dangerous for me to get involved. I don't want to waste the time I would have to go through to become clean again. I'm in a hurry. I just don't want to stop, I'm afraid. The Samaritan comes along and, of course, helps, and he not only spends his time, but he spends his money. He uses his own animal to carry the man to the inn. He spends money. He lavishly gives enough money. Some people say that it's up to 2 months worth of rent at an inn that he pays them. I'm not sure that that's a solid number, but it's a lavish amount of money that he gives to the innkeeper. He's very trusting, isn't he, this Samaritan, giving this money to the innkeeper. He doesn't know the guy might kick the guy out the next day. But he's lavishly caring for this man. Even when it says he pours the wine and the oil on him, the word there for pouring is pouring in a lavish and extravagant way. He's not being skimpy about the care that he's giving to this man. And so we go through all of that, and then he leaves the man in the man's care and he goes away. And we'll mention that again as we go back through this. Generally, we look at this and we talk about this, and when I've talked about this in the past, the idea is, again, back to that idea of even the Samaritan as our neighbor. But many times we look at this and we think, as Jesus is telling him, he said, the one who showed him mercy, Jesus said to him, go and do likewise. The idea is that we are to be that Samaritan. And I think that's true. I think very much so we should be that Samaritan. We should follow the example of that Samaritan. But who might Jesus be casting in the role of the Samaritan? One of the theories, and the theory that I actually like very much, is that Jesus is the Samaritan. Unless we kind of are revolted by that idea that this reviled group, Jesus is one of these reviled group. In Jesus' time, that was an insult to a fellow Jew, to call them a Samaritan. And it's kind of like, at the risk of being not PC, my cousin went to the School of Mines as an engineer. And he played intramural soccer there, and he played with a lot of people from the Middle East were there that were engineering students. Most of the people that in my youth that came over from the Middle East came over for engineering. And that was the case there, and he had all of these people that were from the Middle East, and they were Muslims that were playing soccer with him. And he used to laugh. He says, because when one of them would get mad at the other, they would call the other guy a Jew. And that's when the fight started, he says, as the old saying. And he says that was always a fight. Then the fists started to fly. Because that was the most grievous insult they could give to one another. And in Jesus' time, the most grievous insult a Jew could give to another Jew would be to call them a Samaritan. Sort of just to get you on that level to understand the animosity and the anger that would have revealed. But in John's Gospel, we see something here in chapter 8, verses 42 to 52. Jesus said to them, if God were my Father, you would love me, for I have come here from God. I have not come on my own. God sent me. Why is my language not clear to you? Because you are unable to hear what I say. You belong to your father, the devil, and you want to carry out your father's desires. He was a murderer from the beginning and not holding to the truth. There is no truth in him. When he lies, he speaks his native language, for he is a liar, and the father of lies. Yet because I tell the truth, you do not believe me. Can any of you prove me guilty of sin? If I am telling the truth, why don't you believe me? Whoever belongs to God hears what God says. The reason you do not hear is that you do not belong to God. The Jews answered him, "Aren't we right in saying that you are a Samaritan and demon-possessed?" "I am not possessed by a demon," said Jesus, "but I honor my Father, and you dishonor me. I am not seeking glory for myself, but there is one who seeks it, and he is the judge. Very truly I tell you, whoever obeys my word will never see death." At this they exclaimed, "Now we know that you are demon-possessed. Abraham died, and so did the prophets. Yet you say that whoever obeys your word will never taste death." The important part there is that Jesus is presenting these ideas, and there's resistance to them. And because they don't agree with him, they call him a Samaritan and demon-possessed. And so is it quite possible that in the story of the Good Samaritan, Jesus is saying, the Samaritan is the hero. I'm the Samaritan. I'm that one you don't agree with. I'm that one that is confronting you, and you are angry, and so you're insulting me and you're rejecting me. And so the one that rejected you is the one that loves you. But it goes on from there, and it becomes more poignant from there. Because if Jesus is the Samaritan in that story, and if the man that's beaten up is the Jewish nation that's been beset by the thieves and the robbers and left wounded, and he's not just the Jewish nation, he's all of us, because we all are walking on that dangerous road of life, and we're all at any moment liable to be confronted, attacked by sin or temptation, or you name it, and left bloodied and bruised and beaten on the roadside. But that one that we've rejected, that one that we don't want anything to do with, he's the one that comes along and lavishly cleans the wounds, loads you on the burro, and takes you and leaves you in the care and says, there's no cost too high. I'll pay it all. Christ paid it all on the cross. It's a very, very poignant story of delivery. In closing, I will take the risk of touching briefly and mildly on a political point. There is a message in here about the way, though, that the Samaritan cares for this injured soul. Notice that he leaves the man in the care. He pays the price. He leaves the innkeeper, and he doesn't stay there himself to care for him. Because it's obvious that this man, and of course I didn't mention, but one of the reasons why I don't believe that it's literally a Samaritan is a Samaritan wouldn't be on that road. No Samaritan would be in that territory. Almost never. But that's not the point. But he leaves, he has business to tend to, he has commerce to do. He travels that road regularly, whoever he is. Jesus travels throughout this world repeatedly, coming through our hearts, through our lives. He visits us continually throughout our days here. This man's going to be back, but he needs to continue to take care of business, because what he's doing is how he's able to pay that innkeeper to care for this wayward traveler that's been beaten and abused. I mean, the old story of the golden goose. If he were to stay there and care for the man himself, he wouldn't be able to continue with his commerce, and he wouldn't be able to care for the next traveler he needs to take care of, because he wouldn't have the funds. The story of the golden goose. Yes, if you've got a visitor that comes, you could kill the goose and feed that person. Or you could say, let's wait till morning, that goose is going to lay an egg, and then we'll take that egg and we'll go buy a side of beef, and we can have beef for a month, or we can have goose for a night. So when we're caring for our brothers and sisters, we have to remember that we don't kill the goose to lay the golden egg, because that's not good stewardship. That's not good to care for our brothers and sisters in this world. We need to remember to care for people in the best way possible, that we can care for as many as possible, and not just in a short-sighted manner. That's as far much politics I'm going to get into there, but this story is a remarkable story. It's a remarkable story of deliverance, a remarkable story if we look at this as Jesus as the Good Samaritan. It's not normally the way you probably look at it or the way you think about it. But I think just like most of the parables, there's many, many layers. So let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you so very much for the story of the Good Samaritan. It's probably one of the most important and most vital stories that we have in our Scripture. And Lord, we ask that you reveal it to our hearts, that you allow us to have the love, the compassion, and the grace that the Good Samaritan had for his fellow man. We pray this today in your love and glory.